Tom Clark's 6M podcast is a Boink Studios production. And now, on with the show.
Hey, what is up? Welcome to Tom Clark's 6M podcast. I'm your host, Tom Clark, and in this episode, I'm joined by co-host Phil Lindsey. We're continuing on, kids, with parts 5 and 6 of the Beatles Anthology. We will remind you as we kick things off here today that yes, once again, this is the Disney version. I'm reminded every time I watch one of these episodes, one of these chapters, one of these parts, that it is indeed not the original version that aired on ABC. Back in 95 and 96, I assure you. And I keep saying I'm going to break out those DVDs and watch them, and I probably will when we're done. I don't want to do it right now because I don't want to confuse the issue and get the wrong things in my notes. And then we end up talking about stuff and feels like, I don't remember that happening. So I want to be sure that we're on the same page. But I'm going to, once again, kids, encourage all of you, after you listen to our review of all this and you're done, please go find the DVD set. I don't even think it costs that much money, man. I think you pick it up for a pretty good price on Amazon or wherever you want to get it. And trust me, if you're a Beatles fan, you should own that DVD set because as we know with digital, nothing's ever really owned. You're just owning the rights to watch it for right now. So you don't own anything. Spoiler alert. Hate to break it to you, but all those streamers you're paying for, you don't own any of that stuff. And they remind you all the time of how you're not in control. So, sorry to start everything off on a downer, kids, but I'm just being blunt about it. But we've got a lot of stuff to talk about here today, as we said, parts 5 and 6. But before we get too deep in the weeds, let's do this. The Beatles Anthology is a multimedia documentary project released in 95 and 96, created by the surviving Beatles and Apple Corps as the official, definitive story of the band. In 2025, the anthology celebrated its 30th anniversary. The project included an 8-part TV documentary, 3 double CD sets featuring rare and previously unreleased recordings, and a massive companion book. The documentary covers the band's origins, early years in Liverpool and Hamburg, and rise to global fame. Part 5 that we begin with here today follows the band as they toured, took drugs, and continued to make incredible music in the process. And that is your lowdown for Part 5, at least, of today's review of the Beatles Anthology. So, Phil, as we're kicking off part 5 here today, this chapter kicks off with how part 4 left as they were getting ready to play Shea Stadium. What are your thoughts on the Shea Stadium show, man? How much of this footage have you seen over the years? What's your opinion of how it holds up? What's your take overall?
I haven't seen much of it. Like, I've seen bits of the Shea Stadium. Like, some of it looks familiar, but I didn't see it. I thought that it looked cool to go from episode 1 and to just see the change in technology, to see it go from these guys coming to the US the first time and everything is in black and white, and then seeing the footage from Shea Stadium and it's in color, and just how quickly things changed in a short amount of time, and just how big this band had gotten in a short amount of time.
It's kind of a shock to the system, isn't it, to suddenly see them in color? It's very different.
Yeah. It is one of those things, but I will say that, like, a lot of my fandom around the Beatles is kind of built around this time period. And so I feel like this was some of my favorite stuff of the anthology so far, is because, like, a lot of my discovery of the band is around this time period.
That makes sense. And to frame this properly for you kids, Shea Stadium took place on August 15th, 1965. So we're a year and a few months after their first landing in the United States and appearing on the Ed Sullivan Show. Beatlemania explodes and they conquer the world at that point. They're still very much in the Beatlemania. A year later, this thing's still going strong. As we can see, Shea Stadium. I love, Phil, how the numbers for the attendance change based on who they interviewed.
Of course.
It's quite good.
For wrestling fans, that is something we're familiar with, of, promoters, of course, telling us one thing and then you keep hearing differing numbers. That's not just a wrestling thing, folks. That is an entertainment business thing.
Oh, dude, yeah, and like I forget who had it, but one person said 55, one said 56, one said 57. I
Yeah,
love how George goes, "It told me it was 70." I
yeah,
freaking love that.
yeah. Look, the number is going to keep changing. That's how these things are.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I love that we went from them coming to America and how this was this big moment of them conquering America in their own words, and how much things changed after the first trip to America, and how much Beatlemania really changed things for them. I think really the tone of episode 5 is just how out of hand everything got, and just how much it started to affect the band in a negative way, and how much they were getting tired of it. You don't get the feeling from episode 5 and 6 that they're getting tired of each other. They're getting tired of touring and everything around touring.
Yeah, it really does start to show. The strain of it starts to show. Kids, by the way, if you're following along in real time, we appreciate you. But also, if you're wondering when the band starts having problems, aren't you happy that it hasn't happened yet? Because that always tends to be a kind of a downtime. But man, they make it very clear, Phil, in parts 5 and 6 that everything's still kosher.
Mhm.
Everyone's still good with each other. There doesn't appear to be any hard feelings. Everything's still happy with each other. I mean, as we get deeper into the story, things change pretty quick, at least it appears to be. But I like that we're still in this holding pattern of the afterglow of Beatlemania and transitioning to the no touring bit. I like that they're all still getting along here, you know?
Yes.
To put in perspective, kids, the Shea Stadium, this is according to MLB.com. As we know, Shea Stadium is a baseball stadium. 55,000 fans is the official number, with more than 300,000 being made. And it was said to be the largest concert ever at the time. And supposedly the 57,000 and some change was the maximum capacity. So, who knows about those other 2,000 tickets? Maybe they were comps, who knows? But those are the official numbers. Talk to me, Phil, about the concert in particular. First of all, I think it sounds great. The guys would disagree with that. They would say, well, we were out of tune. We couldn't hear ourselves play. As they said, basically in parts 3 and 4, we can't hear anything, right?
Hmm.
But John, especially, Phil, is really getting bothered. And we see clips of him here back and forth, the way they cut back and forth of him saying, doesn't matter. We couldn't hear ourselves. How can they hear us? It's kind of pointless. I mean, I will say that at this point in time, John, a year into it, seems to be thinking, yeah, I'm kind of over this now.
Yeah, you could see Paul's frustrations with the Shea show,
Mm.
but you could really see John's frustrations seeping over from last episode. I think that he is really the first one that showed that he was over the fame that came with the Beatles.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of the stuff that came with touring. And of course, we're going to see more of that in episode 6. But yeah, you can see John was very much over it. And you can see that George was probably second. George was very much
Yes.
like, whatever, like, I'm kind of tired of all of this stuff, the decision making, the business around this band. You could see that he had enough of that. Um, you could see Paul was still trying to do the um I'm just grateful for this opportunity. I'm just happy to be able to still do this. And, I want to be a touring rock and roller. And um you could see more of his frustrations with just how some of the performance went in this show. And even the performance at Budokan, that also you could see some of Paul's frustrations in that one as well.
Yeah, and we get there and we get there, but no, you know what it appears to me? I think we talked about this in parts 3 and 4 is that no matter what happened, Paul was always up for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
no matter how frustrated everybody else got with the fans, with the decoy cars and everything, that Paul's like, yep, no, I'm good. I'm good. And then Ringo's along for the ride. But I think it's a good assessment to say that John and George were basically the first two to be like, yeah, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. Paul was always the most optimistic. Um And there's ways to look at that. Again, if you're one of those people that does not like Paul McCartney, there's ways to look at that. Um,
Sure.
uh, it, I mean, especially there's a very funny thing that happens with Paul in episode 6, and just how it affect the rest of the band and how he again is right at the forefront. He makes a point to put himself right up front, and it's another one of those situations where it's like, well, who asked you to do that?
Right, of course. Yeah, that's well, as we said, I think in the last episode, I believe that Paul wanted to be a star.
Yes.
And I think the other guys, it sounded good, but then when they actually got their taste of it, they're like, yeah, I don't know if I want this.
Yeah.
It's so crazy how, I mean, it's easy to maybe kind of think of these guys as kind of being brothers, but they're very much four individuals.
Yes.
And they just have different wants and different needs. But I do find it interesting that of the four of them, Paul is always very much the guy to want to keep going. I don't know if you've seen Fred Claus before. I think we've kind of referenced it here on the show. It's a great Christmas movie, but there's a good scene where she's breaking up with him, he meaning Vince Vaughn, and he's down the street and he's telling her excuse about his brother. His brother's Santa Claus. Spoiler alert. But she's like, look, I'm through with this relationship. And he goes, well, I'm not. And she goes, well, I can't take it anymore. And he goes, I'm not through. I can take it still. Like everything's, so at some point with the Beatles, it kind of feels like that. It's like, well, we don't want to do this anymore. Well, I still want to.
Yeah. Yeah. It does feel like at certain parts with him in this band, when they're going left, he's going right.
Yes.
Where he's just like to the bitter end, all the way up to bits of episode 6, where he finally gets on board with everybody else that he doesn't want to tour anymore. It kind of feels like he's the last one to come to that assessment. And as we know, before everyone came to the assessment that this band was splitting up, he was kind of the first, like, yeah, I'm out.
Yeah. Yes. Good point. Yeah. What did you think about the bit where, we're seeing John, he's just saying gibberish because the crowd can't hear him anyway. And he's popping the guys. He's playing the Hammond organ with his elbows and making George laugh the whole time. And George can't sing for laughing. But Ringo's like, I think he lost it during that show. I mean, John's began to show cracks, stress fractures, I believe, in this show, man.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he's kind of looking at, like, look at this, none of this matters. Like, like he's there's a very funny scene from this is a very funny there's a very weird correlation, but follow me. There's a funny scene from King of Queens, where the main character Duck Heffernan is getting into shape, and like he thinks he's killing it, and like he turns around and his friend is helping him work out. He's like tossing these weights back and forth, and they're foam, and he's like tossing
I know the
weights
bit, yeah.
Yeah, it's like tossing the weights, bro. He's like, wait a minute, what's going on? And it kind of feels like this here where John is just kind of like, man, look at this. None of this is real. Like, all of these people are screaming for us. They don't care about what we're playing. They don't care about the music. Like, none of this matters. And he's just like poking fun at the whole thing. And they don't care. They're still cheering him. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah, well, again, they can't hear him. And, dude, even Ringo made a point to say, the reason I joined this band to begin with was because they were the best band in Liverpool. And at this point, we're playing bad. Yeah. Like, we're out of tune. We don't sound good. I mean, dude, when your timekeeper's saying that, there's a problem, right?
Yeah, but I just think that John, one of his greatest gifts was pointing out a farce. And he could see the farce and the irony of the fact that they were bigger than they had ever been. And the crowds could not care less if they were playing well or not.
Yeah. All they heard was the noise and saw them shaking their heads.
Yeah.
Well, I've always, to me, one of the things that's always been very interesting about this band is that it's never just one thing. Just when you think it's the one thing, it's not. Yeah. Because in the juxtaposition of the Beatlemania, the crowds can't hear them, they're playing badly. In the studio, as George Martin pointed out, they're giving me some of the best stuff they've ever gave me. Their creativity is off the charts. This is before they even started drugs. That they're coming up with some of the greatest songs. And dude, around this time, they start working on Rubber Soul and Revolver. And we've covered both albums here on the 6M Kids. They're in the archives. Phil, what do you make of this? This idea that, these four guys, they're the touring thing is starting to show long-term effects on these guys, touring for basically 2 years, you could say. But in the studio, they're just, some of this music that they're playing, of course, as you know, Phil, from both albums, is just fantastic. What do you think about that weird dichotomy we have going on?
Yeah, because I think it's fascinating to watch them go from a band that their real claim to fame was being a touring band, and that ended up being like a crutch in some ways. And like, yeah, they were being paid for all these appearances, but it was hurting them as a band. It wasn't hurting them creatively, but it was stifling them in a way. And absolutely, I do think that, like the first few albums, like a lot of fans, I feel like when you talk to fans and they're like, they don't like the Beatles and like they made very, safe, cutesy music. They're talking about a lot of the doo-wop stuff from the original albums. I feel like when they really started to grow as a band was this time period. I think that they got better musically. I think that they got better creatively. This was when Paul really grew as a bass player. By the time we got to Paperback Writer, like that's some of his best bass playing up to that point.
I agree. Yeah.
So yeah, when you talk about what they were doing in the studios, and Paperback Writer is not even on an album. It's just like a loose record, and it's one of my favorite Beatles records because like the growth from there and their early stuff, it's night and day. And they even talk about how creative it was and like the recording experience for it. It was hard to play it at shows. And same thing with Rain. Rain is such a great record. It's again,
I love this song. Yeah.
Paul on bass is fantastic. That's some of Ringo's best playing as a drummer as well. You could just see just the growth from those two songs and how much better they were as musicians up to that point. But that wasn't coming across in the live performances at all. Like once they got in the studio and they could just actually focus and play and they could hear themselves, it was totally different.
Yeah, and one of the things I don't know that it came across like this, but I think you and I possibly maybe haven't put over what good musicians these guys are. Like kids, I don't want to sell anybody short here and make it sound like, well, they couldn't really play and they got lucky. Nothing could be further from the truth. Like you could argue that Paul's a better guitar player than he is a bass player. Yeah. And Paul can also play drums, and John is great on piano. And, I want to set the record straight. I think that the Beatles are great musicians. I don't, and again, I will defend Ringo to the death. Come at me. But, to your point, Phil, get them in the studio. No one's screaming. They're not running back and forth to cars. They're not sleeping out of a suitcase, basically, and living out of a suitcase, I should say. Give them time to breathe, to get into what they're doing, to write together, to work together. Man, it becomes a different band, really,
Yeah, I think a lot is said about their musicianship unfairly in some ways, especially Ringo, like you said. But anybody that's tried to learn how to play an instrument, there is really no replacement for the amount of time that you play it.
Yes.
And there's a reason why it's always practice makes perfect, and the longer you play an instrument, the better you're going to be at it. And Paul picked up the bass as a necessity because they didn't have a bass player. Right. He wasn't naturally a bass player. And so I think you see from like the first 4 or 5 episodes just how much he grows in that amount of time as a bass player because he initially didn't play bass.
Right.
And like I said, by the time they get the paperback writer, I think that he was much better on bass by then. Because he had taken time and he had been playing it for a long time. And I think that that's just across the board. I think all of them got better because they had been playing together for so long.
I mean, dude, we hear Eleanor Rigby in this one. Dude, if you had played Eleanor Rigby after She Loves You and told a fan at the time, in a year they're gonna make this song, that fan would be like, that's them? Like, dude,
Yeah.
you can't even tell,
Totally different. Yeah, you could see in that amount of time going from the point where George didn't have songs, he didn't have his own songs, and he still was kind of modest about the songs he brought. And he brought them Taxman. And Taxman is really one of their first forays into politics. I don't think he gets the credit for being the first Beatle that really went and put together a song about his own political beliefs at that point.
Love it. I love Taxman. It's one of the most in your face. I've always viewed Taxman as being a middle finger. Like, I've never thought of it as a cute song. It doesn't matter how upbeat it is. I've always listened to that song as a scathing commentary on government. That's how it's always sounded to me.
Yeah, and he was really the first guy to take that risk in a band.
Yeah.
And I don't think he always gets the credit for that. And even when he talks about it in the anthology and how he still is very modest about his songwriting ability at that point, because, they had just accepted to that point that Paul and John write the songs. And, Ringo talked about bringing them a song and how George still wasn't as comfortable bringing their music. And I love that we've started all of these threads that are going to get to a certain point with them as a band. And watching his growth as a songwriter is so important to where he ends up.
Oh, for sure. And we get Yellow Submarine here too. They're playing a lot of the classics in episode 5, kids. But feel back to George, like he mentions Ravi Shankar, and that's where the association comes. He starts falling in love with Indian music, which we'll hear about later in episode 6. But he does the bit on Norwegian Wood. He's like, I feel like the song needed something. It was missing something. And dude, it's fantastic. Like, I can't say I listen to indie music all the time, but if I hear it, I won't turn it off. I just appreciate it. Like, I love the sound of the sitar, man. I know it kind of got overplayed because, again, the Beatles did it first and everybody else had to mimic that later. But, dude, there's something about the Indian music and its sensibilities, and I guess the spirituality of it, that just seems to fit George to a T, man. As a George fan, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think it would be different if it felt like a put on, but it never felt like a put on with George. It felt like something he was legitimately passionate about. And I think it came through in his music.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And I don't think it's a put on either. He seems very genuine about it. But George is the most. I kind of feel like for 4 guys that always call themselves a working class band, which I believe they always were, I think George is probably the most average guy of the bunch, man.
Yeah, I think George is the most down to earth of the 4. I think he's the most what you see is what you get out of him. And
Mhm.
I think that that's why he was really kind of the quickest to be like, yeah, I'm kind of this. None of this is my bag.
Right. Those clips of them hanging out later in 95 and when they're recording these interviews separately and then together at that table, George just seems cranky. He just seems like he's like, yeah, just are we going to be done anytime soon? I want to have some lunch. I don't know.
Yeah,
Like he doesn't want to be there, man.
he
But
he
a
def-
lot of bad blood.
he definitely feels like early on in some of these ports when you get the stuff in Guardians of the Galaxy where teenage Groot and he's like in adolescent, I don't want to have to do this. Why do we have to be here? And he's being difficult. You could definitely feel that kind of energy with George early on because he was the youngest. He was he was very much the most like, I guess here we go with this. And
Right. Yeah. Oh, it's so good. When he's like, I am Groot. And he's like, hey, whoa. They all, because apparently he cursed the way he did it. I don't know.
yeah.
That's such a good bit. The Also, the instrumentation, the experimentation in the studio, Phil. We got to mention like the tape loops, backward guitars, multi-track production. They're pushing beyond traditional pop. And again, as you said earlier, the stuff they can't do live on stage. But dude, we transition from that straight into LSD, and it kind of comes from out of nowhere. Now, look, as someone who is familiar with the band, who's a fan, do you believe that too much has been made of the drug connection? Because, man, for better or worse, out of the Beatles' own mouths, they downplay it to a great extent in parts 5 and 6, but Phil, they're controlling the narrative of the anthology. So who knows if they're working us or not? But do you think it's overblown? Do you think it's just right? Do you think it's not talked about enough? What's your opinion on that?
Well, I think the fantastic thing about the Beatles as a group, I think it comes across really well in the anthology because you have, each episode is such a different part of their lore,
Mhm.
for lack of better words, is that um, we really watched these guys grow up, and they were so young when they started, and watching them go from a teenage band that is you know massive to get
Mm.
that kind of fame that they did that early on and handle it the way that they did, it's really commendable. But at the same time, they were teenagers, and at the they were going to, experiment with things, experiment with drugs, especially in that time period in a world where drugs became such a big part of like, pop culture, and not just in America but worldwide. Um, yeah, of course. And so I think they're going to downplay it, of course, because at that point they're adults when they're talking about it later. So they're going to downplay it and see it as a way. It's like, yeah, it's something we did, but you know, who didn't do drugs at that point as a teenager? Like, especially like I said, in that time in the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself because I can't remember if Ringo says it in part 5 or part 6. But Ringo basically said that we rarely ever did anything in the studio because when we did, it was crap. Like,
Um, yeah. Well, I just think it's different degrees of experimenting with drugs.
Hmm.
And I think they all experimented, but to varying degrees. And I do think a lot has been made about it later on, but I think it's one of those things where, again, they were teenagers in the 60s and 70s at a time
Mm.
where, free expression and drug use was such a big thing.
Mhm.
And so, as as big as they were, as famous as they were, and they of course had access to all of these things, then of course they were going to experiment.
Right.
um yeah, I love how that's such a big part of their lore though, like, because again we got to watch them grow up, and so they went for a period where they were doing all of their regular, clean, straightforward music. All of them had the same haircut, everything was uniform, they all dressed the same. And then you see them grow as individuals, and then become men and go their separate ways and make decisions. And of course, like, their drug use is a part of that.
Yeah, I'm glad that they don't run from it because there's no sense in running from it. But at
Yeah.
the same time, there's parts of it that make me feel like, well, you're grown men, you have adult children at this point, you've probably got grandkids. Like, do you want the grandkids sitting back watching you talk about how you love doing drugs? Like, yeah, probably not. Do you know what I mean? So,
No, and that's probably why they downplay it in some of the stuff later on. But yeah, I mean, I think that, like I said, it's just varying degrees, and John is not there to speak for himself.
that's always a problem, man.
And John has had struggles,
Yeah.
for a lack of better words. He had struggles, and it's gonna come across different from each of them. And when they start talking about the drug use in episode 5, I think it's interesting when it starts with a part of their fame in Beatlemania, and you can see how it's partially used in a way to cope with what they're dealing with and the
Yeah.
level of fame they've reached.
Yeah. And they never shied away from the fact that they all smoked weed quite a bit.
Yes.
And they were smokers, they were cigarette smokers in their day. But one thing and maybe it's true, maybe they all drunk so much they were hungover every day. I don't know. But I never really heard alcohol mentioned all that much through the years. But not to say they didn't drink, Phil, I'm sure they did. But like it didn't seem to be their drug of choice, alcohol, most of the time anyway. At least from a distance, that's what it kind of always felt like. It was always everything else.
Yeah, I always looked at it like they lived the rock star lifestyle, and so they partied.
Sure.
They party hard, and um thankfully, you know, they didn't self destruct because we've seen, several other tragic stories with rock stars and like hitting it hard, and
Right.
but at least they didn't self destruct. It's some close calls with John, but I think that some of it is overblown, and I mean, they get more into that in episode 6, but this where it starts in episode 5 and how George is talking about it and his experience with it. It's so funny, man. Like his his story about being in the lift and like
Yeah, it's so good. Like there's a little red light, but to them it was a raging fire or something. They were all scared to death. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know. And see, here's something else is that I told you that things have definitely been edited here.
Mhm.
But like in the original version of the anthology, when Paul talks about you know, uh he wasn't too keen on this thing where he couldn't get back. In the original version, he's like, I was afraid I wouldn't be able to come back. Like, what if I can't come back? But like they kind of downplayed that here. Like he still seemed like he didn't want to do it, but yeah, it's interesting. It meaning the LSD, but yeah, it's interesting to me how all that worked out. But I've
Yeah.
always felt like it was kind of overplayed, in my opinion, through the years. Like Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is not LSD, kids. It was a drawing that Julian Lennon did at school, and
Mhm.
when he showed it to John, John said, "What is this?" And Julian said, "It's Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds." But because
Yeah.
the Beatles are this, that, and the other fail, it becomes as well. It's all about LSD. Like, all right,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I mean, we got the varying stories. We got that was always the famous story of Julian's drawing, but then we got the story that is told in episode 6 of John going up to the roof and seeing the stars, and so yeah, I mean, I do think it's overplayed to a certain degree. Of course, drug use was a part of um their story of the band. Of course, it was a part of their creative experience as well, but I don't think it was that part. Like I never felt like they were addicts. I mean, I think the telling part to what you're saying about Paul and how he said that he was afraid that he couldn't come back, and then he's like, "Well, John jumped in head first."
Yeah, he did. He was
And
fine with it. Yeah.
yeah, but that just tells you how different they are.
Yeah, and plus, Phil, the idea that you can't come back, maybe John was totally fine with that. Maybe he didn't want to come back.
John, John was destructive in a way that Paul is not.
I agree with that. John always has an edge.
Yes, yeah, I
Um,
think that's come across many times. Uh, but yeah, even in a second episode, in episode 6, where um, Paul does the interview and he admits he's done LSD, and of course, this is why I was referencing earlier, where it's just like, well, yeah, you got to be the guy that said that, and now all of us are implicated because you decided to do an interview and admit that. And then
yeah,
meanwhile, like Ringo said, well, I thought it was funny that we spent all this time trying to convince him to do it, and then he's the first person on TV talking about it.
yeah. George's like, well, we tried for 18 months. You know what that told me? That told me that maybe Paul hadn't done it at that point. That he just said it. Like that's how I read that. I thought it was George's way of going. He didn't do it.
Yeah, he wasn't even a drug user like the rest of us,
Right.
but
Yeah.
I think that Paul wanted the visual. He wanted the appearance of living a rock star life like
I think
everybody
yeah.
else.
I think you're right. Honest to God, I think you're right. I'm not saying he never did it, but
I definitely think he did, but I think that it's just Paul wanted that appearance of being a rock star,
yeah,
and it didn't always. The others were just like, yeah, I mean, this is just something we do. But I
sure.
mean, Ringo outright was like, it's nobody's business.
And Ringo's right, by the way.
It's nobody's business. It's our
It's
personal
nobody's
thing.
business.
It's not like, it became a thing where, like I said, they were addicts and it was affecting the business or affecting the band.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wasn't anybody's business. But yeah, Paul, of course, was the first person to admit publicly that he did it. And everybody else then had to take the implications that came with that.
You know, talk about it hurting the business, hurting the band. There's a story of David Crosby's told before, and I think this incident happened before he got clean, but that he was in the studio with Nash and Young, I guess, or it may have just been Stills and Nash, but that as they're playing, that something fell off an amp. And I want to say the word pipe, but I don't know what I mean by that because I don't do drugs and I'm not familiar with what we're talking about. This is probably the 70s, I would guess and say. So I don't know what that instrument would have been. Don't think it would have been weed because everybody did weed and that's a different kind of drug. But whatever it was, fell off the amp. And David Crosby stopped playing to pick it up. And that's when they knew. Like they knew he was using, they knew it at any given time it was getting rough. But when he stopped playing in the middle of the studio to pick the thing up, put it back where it was, that's when they knew, yep, all right, that's enough. He's got to get help. So, like, to your point, Phil, the moment it gets into the band, that becomes a problem.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, that's why you can see it ways with them just experimenting and them just being kids, being teenagers, like being very young guys with a lot of money and being the life of the party a lot of places they went. Yeah,
mhm.
not surprising that they experimented.
Yeah, yeah, not surprising at all. What about the bit that they throw in here where they start making these short films? The explanation is great, Phil. Basically, they can't be everywhere at one time. They don't want to have to keep traveling the world all the time. So they'll just send Ed Sullivan a video to play on his show. And then George basically said, well, I guess we kind of invented MTV. I got to be honest with you, man. I don't know how incorrect he is. I think there's a good argument to be made that the Beatles were. I think that I mean you go back and look at these videos, Phil. You're like, God, it feels like MTV to me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they were definitely in the forefront for a lot of things. I do think it's funny now. Several times throughout the anthology, it'd be like, "Yeah, we were the first people to do that." And it's
Yes.
like we can't be the first to do all of these things, like, but
Right.
I guess, and it kind of feels like they're doing it very tongue in cheek
Sure.
when they're like, "We were the first people to do this." Like George joking, like you said, that they invented MTV, but yeah, it's seen as such a normal thing to just do music videos now,
Yeah.
but at that time it wasn't, and making music as promotional material and just sending it around, it's yeah, of course, it like I said, it's such an essential part of being a musician and artist now, especially to their level of fame. That yeah, it's like I can't even imagine being a massive artist now and not doing that.
Yeah. 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 It's just become the norm, like you
Yeah,
said. Yeah, it's just become the norm. And also, as we're getting near the end of episode 5 here, kids, and we're going to transition here to 6 in just a few minutes. But they play Budokan Hall in Japan. You and I are big Japanese wrestling fans.
hmm
So I happen to think Japanese people, by all rights, seem to appear very freaking cool. Never had any sort of weird whatever. And I still want to visit there one day. You know, I'm not going to say that, well, this was a sign of things to come. It's a different experience for them because the fans are so reserved. And the guys in charge are basically saying, well, you can't be standing up and you can't do this and you got to be over here and stand on the corner
yep.
and don't be in the street. But to them, Phil, it's like, God, they were so quiet. We could hear how out of tune we were. And it was a different show. What'd you think about all that stuff, man?
I thought it was very funny with how much that translate to what we know about Japanese wrestling fans and
Yeah,
Japanese
yeah, yeah.
crowds. Of course, Budokan is like such a popular building, as they noted for martial arts and for like big wrestling shows. And like when I think of like some of the most famous wrestling shows that were at the Budokan, it's a very famous building. I didn't know that they had ever done the Budokan.
Mm,
I think that's really cool. Like that clip of them getting off the plane in Japan and they all had the robes on, really cool.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, their story about going to Japan and how um, it was very clinical. That's how they that's how they put it.
Yes.
Very clinical. How we were allotted a amount of time that we could leave our rooms, and it was at this specific time, and it felt like a whole military event. And then we were brought down, and like the fans are told, like, "Oh, you have to be here," and it felt like it was like a bunch of fans they collected and put them in the same place at the same time. So it wasn't like the mania everywhere else. It was very controlled. And even then, when they did the Budokan and the way the crowd reacted to them, very much like the wrestling fans at Japanese shows, like New Japan shows. And it's like, yeah, you get the golf clap and everything, but yeah, we're gonna sit quietly and politely and listen to the music because we're not like American crowds and crowds everywhere
Right.
else. Um, and I did think that that was funny, the culture shock that they got there, but also after everything they had been through up to this point and going all these places, and early in this episode, joking about being at Shea Stadium and not being able to hear themselves. And then when they actually heard themselves here, it's like, wait, we're terrible.
Yeah. Yeah. We're out of tune. We're flat. Yeah.
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 Yeah. And I love that is it George or is it Epstein where he's like, I thought that they exaggerated about how bad they were, but yeah, they all came away like we're terrible.
Yeah. Back in episode 4, I think it was, they didn't want that Hollywood Bowl record put out because they like, we listened back to it. It was terrible. Like they managed to salvage enough to put out a record, but it was
Yeah.
highly doctored.
Yes. Yes.
So, well, Budokan happens less than a year after Shea Stadium. It's in July 1st, 1966. And that's not even the highlight of this episode because the highlight's coming. Because they transition from this, and that's a lot of this is where they're talking about some songs that are more difficult to play on stage.
Mhm.
But eventually we go from this, and there's controversy about the Japan show. Like you said, it's supposed to be like a martial arts, and it's considered very like a spiritual place. And Beatles like, look, we're playing because we were invited to play. We were asked to play here.
Yes.
Like they just
yes.
weren't going to get political with it,
Yeah, so you can see across this episode how much touring had become a problem because it was always something, we go somewhere and, we didn't ask to be in the middle of like, political unrest or like whatever is going on in this place. We're just here to do a gig. And we would just be plopped dead in the middle of it. It's like it's Budokan appearances prime example of this. Like, you have people like protesting us and saying that this is a martial arts arena and you're gonna have this negative effect on the youth here. And it's like, well, we were booked to play here. That's it. Like,
Right. When I first watched this, when the anthology first came out, I totally had Paul's back when he's like, if a dance troupe comes to Britain, no one in Britain says they're violating traditional laws. But having watched it back in the past 2 days, I'm like, man, I have no idea what you're talking about. You're talking about two different countries.
yes.
And you know what I mean? Like, it's such an off the wall. Of course, he's young. He's still young when he said this, but what a weird thing to fire back with.
Of course, because it's a culture shock thing and it's a very ethnocentric thing where it's like I know how things take place in Britain. Why would this be a problem? It's like, yeah, but it could be very much seen like you're not showing respect to their culture. And
Sure.
if you don't understand their culture, why would you say something like that?
Again, but Paul was also correct, as we said, when he was like, we were asked to play.
Yeah.
We were invited.
Yeah. But that's Paul in a nutshell. Again,
It is.
Paul is just like, well, what? He's very much like, yeah, there's an aloofness to Paul that I think is funny, but I could see how other people don't think it's nearly as funny.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look, the big controversy of this one, and I don't know how much you knew about the Philippine show before you watched this chapter of the anthology. They expected a few thousand people, over 200,000 people showed up. It is insanity. They supposedly ditch an invitation to dinner after the fact, this big royal dinner, and they were very adamant. I think they said it in episode 3, I believe it was. We're like, look, we don't get many days off. When we get a day off, we take it. We have to have a break. And they're like, thank you for the invitation, but we're going to bow out. It's a day off. And then it hits the fan. I mean, they're lucky they all four got out of there without getting hurt, to be honest. But man, you talk about a wild experience. I'm sure at the time, if you were a fan, you're like, what is going on in that country, man?
Yeah, I had never heard about the Philippine show. I love that when they start talking about this appearance, like immediately you get the idea, like what happened? Because George is like, yeah, that's when we went to the Philippines, and it was a disaster from the very beginning. And it cut to Ringo. I hated it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hated it. None of them had anything good to say about going to Philippines, and they were all basically just like never again, never going back. And yeah, the story here of how they were very much overbooked, but this is how great episode 5 is, and piecing together all of the reasons why they stopped touring, like from start to from finish, from the Shea show all the way up to the point, you could see how touring had really become a problem. And this was really the climax of it. And coming away at the end of the Philippine show was really like the last straw for all of them. And that was really how you got Paul finally on board as well by the next episode to say, yeah, enough. We can't keep doing this. And yeah, it just was a disaster being overbooked and booking a show that they thought was going to be small, and then it ended up being this massive thing. And they just think, oh, well, they're canceling this small royal dinner, and then they get back to their hotels and it's on TV. I thought that was hilarious. When they get back and they're watching this whole coverage, like, I can't believe they didn't show up. They're still not here yet, and they're just watching it on TV.
Ringo's like, yeah, they got the little kids crying on the TV. Like, they're all upset that they're not there.
It's so hilarious. And just, I mean, the juxtaposition as well of early on how they were doing all of these press tours and everywhere they were going, early on when they came to America and everywhere, they would do all of these appearances, not just, their concerts. They were doing all of these appearances. Oh, such and such wants you to come and meet this person, or come have dinner with this person. And they were doing all these things. And so the second they said no to it, and how it was such a big disaster, it's really crazy to see. It's really crazy to see how much things had changed. And then, like, the way they describe getting out of there, and they really downplay getting out of there, and they're like, yeah, it ended up not being bad. And then when you look at like the news clippings, it's like, no, this could have ended up really bad.
Yes. Man, was that giving you some North Korea vibes when you watch those clips?
It definitely told you, again, just culture shock and just what it's like to be a global touring act like they were. And you're getting involved with so many different cultures and so many different governments, and not everyone is gonna mean well by you. And the second that the government there felt slighted by them, yeah, it got pretty scary. And
yeah, and plus Paul pointing out that because the government was corrupt, that they loved that they were actually probably the first people to ever give the middle finger to them and stand up to them.
Yeah, and I mean, they didn't know that at the time, of course.
Sure,
and
sure.
Now, of course, he was like, looking back at it, he was like, yeah, I'm glad we did that. But again, Paul is hilarious, man. Paul is hilarious to me, man. It's just like, it almost reminded me of in Get Back when he realizes the cops are coming up there and he's the most excited ever. They're going to arrest us.
Best day ever. Yeah. The way he looks back and does that woo on the mic, that is the greatest thing ever. He's so excited. What a way to end the show.
We made it, man. We're rockers, man. They're trying to kick us out.
Right.
Boink Studios YouTube is the home of Tom Clark's 6M podcast. Tom Clark's main event, Bear Mode, a podcast review of The Bear, and Two Nations Under Ted, a Ted Lasso podcast. Subscribe to the channel for archives that date back to 2014, with new content being uploaded every week. And check out boinkstudios.com for links to every podcast platform, social media, special announcements, and a lot more. Bookmark the site today.
speaking of ending this part of the show anyway, kids, this episode 5 ends with them basically telling Epstein and everyone else that would listen, we're not going to do this again. And then they were reminded, well, they're trying to line up Shea Stadium again. If you don't play it, you're going to lose $1 million. And that's how episode 5 ends. Episode 6 begins with a real kick in the teeth. And kids, if you don't know the story about John Lennon's quotes about being bigger than Jesus, boy, you're going to be surprised when episode 6 kicks off with a Klan member.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it feels so out of place. You're like, is this a Beatles documentary? First of all, kids, F Nazis and F the Klan. And, if your race is homophobic, I'll just stay away from my show. But, dude, have you ever seen this clip before?
I never seen that clip. Of course, you have to be living under a rock to not know this John Lennon quote. It's one of his more controversial quotes. The end of episode 5 with Epstein is really hilarious as well. When he's telling the story about them in Shea Stadium, and he's just like, "We're gonna lose a lot of money. Whoops, cut the credits."
Yes.
But yeah, opening this episode with the Klan member, and then again, just the juxtaposition of Beatlemania in America in episode 3, right? And then we get to this episode, and it's people throwing their records in a trash can and burning their Beatles paraphernalia. Big change. But yeah, and also the way America had embraced them, and like seeing a part of white America now rejecting them because Christianity is such a big part of, white American way of life. Also, big juxtaposition as well, because there's an innocence to their initial run.
Mm-hmm.
And so when now you're seeing them grow and like become more rebellious, now you're seeing more of the parents like, well, who are these guys? Screw these guys.
Yeah, it's night and day. I mean, just think 2 years prior. And by the way, kids, part 5 covered 65 to 66. Part 6 covers July 66 to June 67. So that's where we are. But yeah, dude, just 2 years before they were the toast of the country. And now you've got, people smashing records and being encouraged to bring the records and paraphernalia and merchandise and memorabilia to be burned and whatnot. And kids, just so everyone here is aware, it was in March of 66, the London Evening Standard newspaper, Maureen Cleave, I believe was the reporter's name, or the person that interviewed John. And it was called How Does a Beatle Live? John Lennon Lives Like This. That was the name of it. Maureen Cleave. She was a friend of the group. John didn't have any reason not to trust her. And he didn't hold back. He said, quote, "Christianity will go. It will vanish and sink. I needn't argue about that. I'm right and will be proved right. We're more popular than Jesus now. I don't know which will go first, rock and roll or Christianity. Jesus was all right, but his disciples were thick and ordinary. It's them twisting it that ruins it for me," end quote.
Yeah.
I mean, Phil, growing up as a kid in church, because I did, even though I love the band, it was hard for me to reconcile that. But in 95, 96, I had just about was done anyway with that part of my life. So at that point, I had become an adult and realized, I don't think he meant that the way that everyone took it. What are your thoughts about what he said? Was there a better way to say it? Does it matter he didn't say it a better way? What do you think?
I think it was taken out of context, and I just don't think it mattered how he said it. I think when you just focus on that part, the Beatles are bigger than Jesus Christ, it's always going to sound bad. And especially at that time, like I know for Christianity, there's always been this side to it, like don't question Jesus, don't question these things, like you just have to have faith in all these things. But we're talking about a major, famous rock and roll star at this point, telling impressionable youth that he's bigger than God. You can't do that at that time. In the 60s, yeah, of course not. You cannot do that.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's unheard of. And So yeah, I think a part of it is the time period, but I do think it was taken out of context. Now, uh, because John has done this multiple times, uh, whether he may or may not have put his foot in his mouth,
Right.
um, I think he has his way of saying things, and I don't think he means anything by it. And I think he may think he's like trying to point to a bigger issue in the world where, oh, everybody's paying attention to us, and we're just rock stars. Um, but I think he thought himself he was talking about like how fleeting fame is and how, you know, we should matter, but at this moment people think we're bigger than Jesus. And it shouldn't be that way. And I think that's the way he meant it. But again, if you hyper focus on just the sentence, the Beatles are bigger than Jesus Christ, nobody's going to read it that way.
No, not at all. And I'm sorry. I think he's right. I mean, first of all, I think you're right about him being out of context. But second, I don't disagree with anything he said because his point, I've always felt, was we were drawing bigger crowds than church was. There's a problem with that. What about your boy? How come that guy's not drawing crowds like we are? Isn't that a problem? I think he was calling out hypocrisy. That's how I always read it.
Yeah, I think that he had a bigger point, and I think a lot of times he had a bigger point he was trying to make. But when you hyper focus on it, on like just the quote, it's hard to get past like how it sounds, surface level.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, that ended up being a big change for them, a big part of the change of perception for them. Um, because again, they were seen as very innocent. They were making very simple songs about love and I want to hold your hand and like
Mm-hmm.
this changed the way a lot of adult groups were looking at them. It changed the way a lot of pop culture looked at them, and I think that it helped them in some ways. To be honest,
I think it did in certain circles, but I do think that for this country, the bloom had fallen off. The bloom was off the rose at that point.
yes, but I mean, I think once there's always tale as old as time.
Mm-hmm.
When you get famous, the next story is not how much bigger can you get; it's when are people going to get tired of you, and when are you going to fall off?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And these guys were massive at this point.
Yeah.
And I think that, people were looking for reasons to knock them off this pedestal with people. And I think that came across a lot towards the end of their time as a touring act. I don't think their fans got tired of them, but I think the coverage got negative.
Yeah.
The coverage got like, how can we poke holes in these guys? Like, who are these guys really?
Yeah. And like you said, people enjoy the rise. People love the fall even more.
Absolutely. Every time.
Yeah.
And so I think it was easy to take him out of context, but then also it became an easy way to, knock them off their pedestals and go, who does this guy think he is?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't, a lot of this is not fair, as we said. But again, like Phil mentioned, kids, you have to remember about what the time period was. And here's something else I'll say. When they did go back and play Shea for the second time, that reporter, the way he is leading those kids, well, I mean, you don't really like him anymore, do you? I mean, how long you really you think they're gonna last? This guy sounds like a Fox News dude. You know what I mean?
But yeah, that just the change of the time, and just when they came to America, and then how much things changed later, how much things changed after that quote. I thought it was hilarious too. When they interviewed each member of the band, they're like, "We did Shea Stadium a second time."
Yeah, they didn't even remember.
Really? We did a second time? And then Ringo's joke of how did we do? And then of course, like they're trying to act like it was like a downfall because they didn't do as many. Oh, really worried about those Beatles, man. couldn't sell the same amount of tickets the second time. I wonder how that panned out for those guys.
Yes, right. Yeah, that ruined them. Supposedly, they sold around 45,000 tickets, but that's the number I have. Don't know how accurate it is. So it's 10 or 11,000 less, but still, Phil, 45,000 people.
45,000 people is still a lot of people.
That's a
Um,
bunch of people.
but yeah, it was very jarring to go from these guys are like embraced the first time they came to America.
Mm-hmm.
The way that the press treated them the first time, like you had that whole train ride where the press were just there and being very nice and like trying to be, we're genuinely curious about these guys and writing stories about them. And then you've got this guy like around Shea Stadium, like, yeah, you're not really fans of these guys anymore, are you?
Mm.
How much longer do you think this is going to pan out? And I love how that coincides with everything from episode 5 and how much mania was really starting to take a toll on them. And by the beginning of this, it's like you can tell it's just this is it. And the stuff in the Philippines and how it just started to feel more and more unsafe. And they don't mention it here, but of course, they came to America in the early '60s. This was before the Kennedy assassination, right?
Well, when they came here for Sullivan, it was 60. It was 64, so it was after Kennedy's. Kennedy was in November of 63.
Okay. But yeah, just you can see just how much the world had changed
Mm-hmm.
and just how much more dangerous it felt to just be like, oh, this isn't just like innocent, like, oh, it's teenage girls chasing us up the street. Like, no, it's teenage girls chasing us up the street. It's like freaks like trying to cut our hair off and
Yeah.
like grabbing us and people like trying to poke and prod at us. And then we're getting dumped in the middle of all of this stuff and like now you have us in the middle of like social and political stuff that we never really wanted to be a part of and
Yeah.
like we're being part of conversations with religion and all this other stuff and I do think it's very telling that the guy that we've both been like, yeah, he was kind of getting tired of this fame thing. And John, he was the first one to say something in an interview that then turned into like, yeah, kind of sick of this. Like I could see that this added even more fuel to his dislike of fame.
And I don't believe, maybe this is me thinking too highly of a rock star that doesn't deserve it. I've never believed that John intentionally tried to sabotage anything. But I also do believe that he did not intentionally try to sabotage anything. What I mean by that is, I don't think he set out to hurt the band, but I also think at that time he was like, I don't really care. Like,
I, I, yeah, I do think it was one of those things where he was probably just looking at like it was just the stupid quote taken out of context, and then
sure.
now I have to do this whole press thing and apologize, and it's like this is all annoying, and it just you could see his annoyance with it.
Yeah. Well, he had good
And
reason to be. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's yeah. He just seemed very annoyed with it, and yeah, but just like going back and doing Shea Stadium the second time, and they're just like I said, the time between the first Shea Stadium appearance and this one, and how by the time they go this time, it's just like, all right, I've had enough.
And Ringo's setting up his cymbals to sit straight up to try to deflect bullets because they're getting death threats. And George Martin's like, I'm looking at a hills, and like they could put snipers up there and take out everybody on the stage. Like, dude, Phil, in 2025, that part of this anthology hits a little bit harder.
Yeah, yeah. When you have that level of fame, and this is pre-internet,
Yeah, true.
and you're getting death threats, like you're less accessible back then because how would people even know to get in contact with you? Whatever, I guess phone and stuff, but
Mhm.
like to be less accessible and not have to deal with the craziness of the internet back then and still be getting death threats. That's yeah. I have to imagine that was very scary. And then also, I also think about now how people sending people death threats on the internet is seen as such a everyday thing. Where now when you hear it, it's just like, oh yeah, that's just how the internet is.
It's
But
a
then,
Tuesday. Yeah.
yeah, but back then, just getting a death threat is just like, oh my god, this is crazy.
Yeah. You're scared. You're scared for your family. It becomes a real
Yeah,
deal. Not that it's not the real deal now, but still.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, the way that we're desensitized in some ways to death threats because it's such a normal thing on the internet is also, yeah, it's pretty terrifying.
Yeah. Well, things don't get any better, kids. The band at this point, again, everything seems fine within the band. The guys still seem good. The guys are good, but for all intents and purposes, they are good. For everything we know. And but the touring part of this, it's done. They can't do this anymore. Last Shea Stadium, they don't even remember it. It is what it is. And eventually things keep going in that direction until they finally decide we're done. They didn't announce it. They were at the round table talking about should we announce it? No, let's keep it quiet. The last Beatles concert, at least to that era, was Candlestick Park in San Francisco, August 29th, 1966. This marks the official end of touring and a symbolic close to the live era. And what I love, Phil, is that they walked away. Beatlemania, I won't say it ended, but Beatlemania stopped in its tracks because they decided. Fans didn't decide. Critics had nothing to do with it. They stopped it, which I always really love, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's something to I think of a lot of this band and how uh they kind of got up and they were done before people were done with them, like before people got tired of them. And I mean, yeah, you could say that like, the coverage had gotten more negative by that point and they had to deal with a lot more scrutiny than they did before. But that comes with fame. They still probably could have continued to sell out venues and continued to tour if they wanted to.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I think they totally could have. I don't see the rest of the world turning on them the way America did at this time. I don't think it happened.
Yeah, and I mean, even with the way America turned on them, you saw with those interviews at Shea Stadium,
Yes,
their fans would have still came to see them.
I love that. That was so cool. Those kids, man. I'm gonna tell you something, folks. The next time one of you guys in your 30s, 40s, or older tries to slam dunk on a teenager, F all the way off, man. You used to be young too. We need people young like that to speak up and not take any BS. So I was like, you know what? I don't know who those kids are, who they grew up to be, but man, it was so cool to hear them saying the things they said to that friggin' reporter, man. Very
Yeah.
cool. So, kids, things start to get very interesting here because as soon as they stop touring, John goes to make a movie. I have never seen How I Won the War, but I've always wanted to watch it. I haven't heard anything about it, but after having watched the anthology again, I definitely want to see it. George goes to India, hangs out with Ravi Shankar. George is really immersing himself into that culture. Paul makes a score for the movie, a British film called The Family Way, which apparently won some awards. It sounds pretty cool amidst the trailer there. And Ringo just went to hang out in Spain with John, which I found kind of funny. They all had a project except Ringo.
Yeah. Um, yeah, the thing I love about this after they stopped touring, it wasn't just like, well, that's that. What are we gonna do? They all kind of started their own thing, but this really started. Well, I won't say it started it, but this was more of the development into them, maturing as individuals, and like you start really getting peeks into, what all of these guys are good at and what they might do later. I do think it's very telling that Paul went and did a score for something, and with just his style of music towards the end of the Beatles run and how it was very much operatic and
Mm,
very much around storytelling, and it very much had that vibe of like almost like a soundtrack for a musical. I thought it was very telling that that was a part of what he was doing when the group took that short break. Um, of course, George went to India and started delving more into spirituality, and that became a big part of his life as an adult and like who he would become. Um, and then John went and filmed a movie, and I still think it's very telling that we got this far. We're 6 episodes in. we do not see very much about him and his wife at all.
Nothing.
Nothing about his family life, and I think that
No.
that's kind of telling to who he was at that point and how much, I won't say that he didn't love his first wife or that he didn't love his kid. Um, but I do think it's very telling that it wasn't a part of this documentary up to this point at all because he was always away.
He was always away. And, all four guys did stuff on the road. Kids, we haven't went into that because it's not in the anthology and we're not trying to do a tell-all expose. But they were rock stars. And, Yoko wasn't the first person John cheated on Cynthia with, I'm sure.
Of course.
So.
Of course. But yeah, like George mentioned Cynthia early on at one point, like when he's driving away from their whole LSD experience. He's talking about how he's trying to focus in this little bug that he's driving, and he says that Cynthia, John, and Patty are in the car with him.
Yes, that's true. I forgot about that. Yeah. Man, that Patty Boyd, brother, let me tell you, you and me have kind of joked about her on other Beatles shows we've done here.
Yeah, and I mean, they mentioned Patty early on when they filmed their first movie. That's where George met Patty, and then Patty became his longtime girlfriend. And, they also mentioned Eric Clapton in this episode.
Yep. Dude, Patty must have been an amazing woman. Like, I don't know what to say. And I'm not trying to dunk on her either, but yeah man, she became the product of more than one song. And yeah, dude. Ooh, man.
Yeah, I love that, once we see them step away from touring and they're not doing the matching suits anymore. And like, you see more of their individuality. They're letting their facial hair grow. John is finally wearing glasses because he clearly needed them.
Yes. For sure. And musically, they are still experimenting. They are still being more creative than they ever have been. If we thought Rubber Soul and Revolver were amazing, you hadn't seen anything yet, kids, because at this time, we get Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane. And it is absolutely mind-blowing, Phil, how they went from where they were. And again, Phil, if you can wrap your head around this, this is 2 years later. They went from She Loves You to Strawberry Fields Forever. They went from Please Please Me to Penny Lane. Like, unbelievable, man. Like when an artist experiments now and stuff, but at the time, I can't imagine imagine being a music critic at that time or being alive as a teenager at that time and going, what? Like, dude, it must have been crazy. Look how far they came in just 2 years, Phil.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's kind of like, being an Outkast fan and then you hear Andre bring out Prototype. It's like, wait, what's this?
Good point.
From there to here.
Right.
But yeah, I love the scene in this episode where Paul plays the beginning of Strawberry Field on a synth, and then that cuts into the music video for Strawberry Fields Forever. So cool. Like I said, this is like really the era of Beatles music that made me a fan. That was really when I started discovering them. There's just something about that time period from like when they started doing more experimental music, doing Paperback Writer up to this point. And yeah, the video for Strawberry Field Forever is one of those. I've seen it, and it just kind of has like this. I don't know. It just has this mythos to it, man.
I love it.
It's a very strange video, but I love it. It's so unique to that time period for them, and it's such a great song, man.
It's a great song, and I'll be honest with you, I think this is their best look. I think when they're first growing the mustache and George has like looks like a goatee / beard. I think this is the best John looked with them. I know it's a weird thing to comment on. Yes. I know it's a weird thing to comment on, right? Because these guys were very much about style. Yes. I love the way they look, man. I think it's great. Always been a fan of this.
Yeah. John with his chops and his glasses at this point. Paul's got his big mustache.
Yep. Ringo's got his stash. George got his almost looks like a Van Dyke, but it's a beard. It's just the way it connects. But George looks great. I don't know. I know it's a weird thing to comment on, but I just love the look they have. I love the clothes. I just think this might be my favorite period in terms of style for them.
We're getting into like flower power era, and like we're coming into like the
Yeah.
mod era in Britain as well. And like, yeah, you got a lot of like the striped suits and like the colorful suits. They're coming out of, like I said, this era of matching suits. They have their own individual styles. And yeah, I think that it's so important to the era of them creatively and like the artists they matured into.
Oh, dude, yeah, well, dude, I think you said it well earlier. We're watching them grow up before our eyes at this time. Like they're becoming, I mean, they're already men, but they're becoming adults now. Like John used the word in one of these sound bites that he used the word contemporary. Like contemporary fits. This is avant-garde stuff to a certain degree, but it's also very grown, very adult, very mature. They're all four just staring at the camera and not smiling. When's the last time a Beatle stare at a camera, didn't smile? Right, dude, it's very, very much a different band here
Yes.
for sure. We've mentioned this on other podcasts about these guys, Phil, because we've reviewed all these albums. But to this day, Strawberry Fields Forever, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. I mean, and then you have, Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. And it's like, it is amazing to me, the creativity, even after all these years of being a fan. And I love the stuff on by the way, kids, we've not barely ever mentioned, at least in this episode, the audio CDs that accompany the original anthology. You should go out of your way to listen to the outtakes and whatnot, because their reprise of Sergeant Pepper, the best version ever recorded, is on the anthology, in my opinion, Phil. It's bare, it's bare bones, it's stripped down, it's freaking wonderful. And it's not the final take that made the album. I love it. And I just think they sound so raw. I mean, apart from the orchestra stuff, they just sound like such a really good band. But Pepper has a much different sound, as we know, than anything that came before it or after it. And Phil, how many years in a row did bands try to do their version of Sergeant Pepper? It's nuts.
It's funny thinking about it, like thinking about the idea that Sergeant Pepper is their any heartbreak. Um, I don't know if some people will understand that reference, but um, New Edition was very famous boy band at one point, and then they made
Right?
this album where they had grown up, and all the guys are on the front in like the suits, and Any Heartbreak was really the album that felt like they grew up. They're adults now, and it's one of their best albums. Sergeant Pepper is similar in that way, that it was really these guys as adults. Um,
I've never heard that analogy, but that's interesting.
but yeah, just creatively where they were at this point. Like I said, this is really what made me a fan.
Mm.
And like Sergeant Pepper's arguably their best album.
Mm.
I mean, I'm sure it's debatable. They have so many great albums, but there's a reason why it's a fan favorite. It's credited as like the first concept album. I love their story about how like Ringo's talking about how, yeah, we had this whole idea of doing this whole rock opera and starting with, of course, Sergeant Pepper. That's the first song, and then uh, a little help from a friend, and then we just completely just went off and started making. We just completely were like, "I don't know with that," and just started making our own songs. John at this point is just like, yeah, every song I wrote had nothing to do with the original concept. But here's the thing: I never looked at it like that, and I guess now that I hear that, it's like, oh yeah, no, they definitely stopped going in that direction with the concept after the first two songs. But I always looked at the album, and maybe it's because of the cover that helps this kind of imagery.
Yeah.
It's always felt like this big variety show or this like traveling circus. And so every song feels like, oh, this is the next act. Like, Lucy in the Sky with the Diamond, I always think like of like a tightrope walker and like all of these other things. It always felt like this big traveling circus to me.
See, I've always had the opposite opinion. It has always felt like it belonged. In my head, it always felt like all the songs were connected. I got
Yeah,
the band telling me they are not, Phil, and I'm like, yeah, they
yeah,
are. Like in my head, they are.
yeah. That's what I always thought. I thought that all the songs connected because it just felt like this big, massive variety show, this big, massive like traveling circus. And so
Yes.
when you hear that the songs didn't connect, I'm like, but I always felt like they did. Maybe I don't know. Maybe I just wanted them to. I don't know.
Yeah, dude. Every time I hear that quote from John, I'm like, stop, please playing that clip. You're ruining it for me. Like, I want to know it the way I know it. Tom Clark's 6M podcast is sponsored in part by Radius Law Group. Every day, Radius helps individuals, families, small businesses, and nonprofit organizations throughout North Carolina, Florida, and Pennsylvania resolve their legal issues by providing effective legal counsel in the areas of estate planning, as well as elder law and Medicaid. Radius Law holds the radical belief that working with a lawyer can indeed be enjoyable. So give them a call at 1-800-519-5667 for more information and tell them that Tom Clark's 6M podcast sent you. Penny Lane does not hit number one. And it was the first song. I think Ringo gave the number of 7. Like, he's like, well, we were happy. It was about time because everything we did went straight to number one. I don't know, man. I'll bet Paul wasn't too crazy about that. You can hear an audio clip of him, but I'll bet Paul wasn't happy about that.
No. No. Yeah, Ringo's. Yeah, that is such a Ringo quote of him feeling like, yeah, took some pressure off. Like,
Yeah.
but a perfectionist like Paul, I'm sure he was not happy about that. John has done it a few times, by the way, of very much being like, oh, that doesn't mean anything. You guys thought that meant something? It doesn't mean anything. Like,
Yeah.
of course, like him poking fun at all of the people trying to find all of these hints that Paul is dead in all of these songs, and he's just like, mean anything? What are you guys talking about? Or famously, Dig a Pony and how much people love Dig a Pony, and he's just like, yeah, it's not about anything.
Yeah. Say the same thing about On the Walrus. It means nothing. It's gibberish. None of it's
Yeah.
connected. I mean, there's no thinly veiled nothing. There's nothing here. All you people are crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, I was very high when I wrote that song. And
Yeah.
it's not about nothing.
And then he trolled the fans himself in Glass Onion when he's like, I got another clue for you all. The walrus was Paul. It's so great. Like, basically thumbing his nose at his own fans, man.
Yeah, but that of course lines up with him in front of the crowd at Shea Stadium, very much just like, this none of this means anything.
Yeah, it's so great. I love the Pepper stuff. I love this episode. This might be my favorite episode just because I love the Pepper stuff. But I love that they go into all the tracks, most of the tracks on here. They really hit the big ones. And they lead straight into A Day in the Life. And man, when George Martin plays back that track of John and John's counting down, because John would always do this thing instead of going 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or whatever. He would say something that took the place of the 1, 2, 3 count. And he did Sugar Plum Fairy, Sugar Plum Fairy. And when George knew it was coming and he lit up. And when he's isolating John's voice, like, dude, you can see the level of respect. And I don't know if you can say love, but you can see George, even at that time, 30 years later, was still in awe of John Lennon, man.
Yeah, I mean, again, like we're saying this as fans, as spectators. You watch these guys grow up. He was there.
Yeah.
He watched these guys grow up from like guys that he was around when they were young and watched them become, adults. And then up to that point, 30 years later, he watched like where John went as a solo artist and everything. And so, yeah, I got to imagine some of this stuff is welling up in him of like the respect he has for this guy, the love he might have for this guy, and just being there for, some of their biggest moments.
As I said, kids, please go back in the archives when you have an evening to burn and you want to listen to some cool episodes. Please do so. We've covered a lot of Beatles albums here. So Phil, we talked about A Day in the Life, but it's been a minute, so I don't recall what we really said about it at the time. A lot of fans consider A Day in the Life to be the Beatles' best song of all time. What say you? Do you agree with that?
I don't know if I would say it's their greatest of all time, but I think it is so important to their discography, man.
Hmm.
Like I think this album in general is so important to the transition they made from their earlier work to the stuff they were making later. Um, but yeah, it's such an important song to just like their creative process, to their innovations in the studio. Um, just the amount of stuff from this album that people tried to replicate.
Hmm.
It's absolutely one of their most important songs, and it belongs in like, of course, all of these like top 5, top 10 lists of Beatles songs for sure. It's kind of tough for me to say the greatest Beatles song ever, though. They have so many great songs.
I love the song, but I too don't know if I could say it's one of those things, Phil, where like someone says, "What's the greatest movie ever made?"
Yeah,
Well, that may not be your favorite. If you're being like you're a podcaster, you're a writer, your answer might be, "Well, here's what I think the greatest movie ever made is, but it's not my favorite. Here's my favorite movie." You might have two answers.
yeah,
Like some people would say, "Well, the best Beatles song of all time is Hey Jude." Why? Because it's my favorite. That doesn't mean it's the best Beatles song of all time. Like I don't know. Maybe I guess everybody may have a different answer to this because, like you said, their discography is so huge.
yeah.
I think so too. I do love, by the way, Phil, that we got these clips here of A Day in the Life, and shout out to the late great Mike Nesmith of the Monkees, because I always remember these clips. He's hanging out with John at whatever party they're at, and for some reason that's always stayed with me. But you can hear the music playing in the background. Phil, when they talked about how they pieced the two songs together, and Paul talked about the chord at the end on the piano, he hits it in real time and he references as he's talking to that guy interviewing him. Like, you hear it? It's still going. It's still going. It's still going. None of this was in the original anthology, but it cracked me up. I'm like, yeah, Paul's very much dialed into this documentary process, man.
Yes. Yeah, I love that there's a bit that they play right after they made the decision to stop touring. And uh they did this montage of all of
Hmm.
them separately during the interviews and people asking like, "Are you done with the band?" They're like, "No, of course not." Like, no.
So good.
And they're all very abrupt, very matter of fact, like, no, no, we're still a band. Um, but yeah, I love when they talk about piecing the two songs together and how Paul says, like, we just went with the best idea. Um, that was how we made decisions. It was never any disagreement, and it's sad because that's not what eventually happened to this band.
Yeah.
But just their camaraderie at this time period, you could still see that they were very much enjoying being together. They were still very much friends, and even if they had differing opinions, like they were like, "Oh, well, let's just piece both of our ideas together and make this great song."
Yeah.
There was
Crazy.
none of this fighting and not being able to come to an agreement on what they should do. Yeah, you could see just like how things were differing. And this is, of course, not the first time uh, Paul and John have had separate ideas that ended up becoming one song.
Hmm.
Um, but this is yet again in their discography where that's happened. You can see how they're both in different places in their lives and just like the divergence that's happening.
Yeah, you're right. And I keep putting over the fact that they're all still on the same page because at least to the world, they're not showing any signs. I truly believe they're not showing signs yet, but it's coming. Like,
No, I don't think they're showing the signs of splits, but I do think they're showing signs of them just growing up. And I think,
mm,
unfortunately, a lot of times when we grow up, sometimes we start to grow apart.
yeah, yeah, which is what happened. Kids, if you're doing the math, we're talking about when these songs are recorded, when the videos are being sent out, and these clips and everything. The actual album of Sergeant Pepper was released in May of '67, and there just so happens to be a young man in the country of England at this time. They released the song on a Friday, and by that Sunday, this guy you might have heard of named Jimi Hendrix is playing it live. So Philly had 2 days to learn it, and I'm like, best story ever.
Yeah.
Jimmy was a fan and he didn't make any bones about it. I just love it, man. So cool.
Yeah, Jimmy does not know the words. When you go
No.
back and listen to the cover, the words are wrong. The words are definitely wrong. But I've always loved this story. This is a very famous story if you know Jimi Hendrix, and of course his trip to London and what that became. Him going to London and leaving and coming back to America and becoming the Jimi Hendrix we know. But I love this story. I love that Paul was there when when he performed the cover.
Hmm.
It's just such a great story.
Yeah, it's so cool. And again, I like when musicians are fan of musicians, kids. And Jimmy was still very much a fan. Jimmy was a fan of Dylan. Jimmy was a fan of the Beatles. Jimmy was a fan of Muddy and Howlin' Wolf. And Jimmy was a fan of Son House and all those old blues guys and Freddie King. And it shows in his playing.
Yeah.
And yeah, I always love that. I will say that around about this part in part 6 here, George is making the comment that basically his heart was still in India, where
Mhm.
he went in 66, and that everything else after that just felt like work to him. So, if there is a Beatle Phil who is at that time, and again, not in the press, but George is 95, 96, basically saying, yeah, I'm at that time, it felt like work. So, already for George, this is starting to feel like, yeah, I don't know if I want to do this anymore.
Um, yeah, uh, yeah. I love Jimmy's cover. By the way, even though he does not know the words, his solo on the cover is so great. Uh, but yeah, the like I said, you can see that all these guys are growing up, and I think that Paul and John really have their identity creatively up to this point. Their creative stamp on the band is the most profound because they write all the songs.
Mhm.
I think George is still trying to find his identity creatively up to this point, and he doesn't really have the chance to find it as a member of this band because it's just like even when he describes the sessions for this album, and this is like I said, considered a fan favorite. This is considered a lot of people's favorite Beatles album. And he's just like, yeah, I wasn't that big of a fan of this album. And it's because he he just comes in and he records his parts and he leaves. It's not the same collaborative thing, and he doesn't have as big of a stamp in terms of songwriting on this album. So I could see him feeling that way. I could see him feeling like, especially when they describe, the 9 month time where they put this album together, where it wasn't just a steady 9 months in the studio. It was like, okay, we recorded some bits here, then we came back and recorded these things. It's just kind of like, yeah, they probably called George in to record his parts, and then that was it.
Interesting. Well, like you said, Phil, you chalk a lot of this up to the fact that they're all starting to grow up. They're getting their own musical
Yeah.
tastes. Yeah,
Eh,
divergence is a good word.
Yeah, he wasn't involved in a lot of the decision making with the songwriting. So yeah, I could very much see him not being that big of a fan of this time period. It's just crazy to think about that because this is a all time great Beatles album. And he's just like, yeah, I'm a fan of it.
And plus, I don't think we brought this up in a couple of different episodes now that Ringo has referred to John and Paul as the writers.
Yes.
And
Yes.
there's very much a distance when he uses, I don't know that he means it that way, but there's very much a distance when he says the words writers when addressing two of his best friends in the world.
There's a tone to it. There's definitely a tone to
I
it.
think so too.
And yeah, I think that he and George both felt that way. I think that John and Paul had a different relationship. And then, like I said, they have an identity creatively at this point
Mm-hmm.
that uh, Ringo and George just haven't quite developed yet. Arguably, Ringo's best song in terms of lead vocals, at least, was "Little Help with My Friend." It's on
Mm-hmm.
this album, and so, but it's is different with George. Like George doesn't really have a song here that he wrote. There is a period from there's a mostly a period where he has a song that he wrote on every album. Um, he has a song on this album, but it's not like one of his like most well known songs.
Isn't it Love You Too on this one? On Pepper?
No, it's what do you call it? It's isn't it Within You Without You? That didn't he write that?
Yeah, I don't know why I'm blanking on it.
But I know he sings lead vocals on Within You Without You.
Yeah, well, to his credit, Phil, he's still very much adapting, this new style, this new Indian influence that he's got. He's very much still, I think, evolving as an artist who's now, moving in that direction. Um, so for the songs that I don't really, for the Indian songs that he did that I don't really care about, I'm always wondering, was it because they're not good or because he's still finding himself, or I'm just
Yeah.
not digging him. Maybe that's what it is. Within You Without You, you're right. Yeah, Love You Too. I forget where that's at.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. He's still finding himself as an artist. He's still finding his identity. He doesn't really start peaking until like around the White Album,
I
and
agree.
so they have what like maybe two albums between there. So you got Sergeant Pepper and then Magic Mystery Tour.
hmm
I don't remember what George wrote on Magic Mystery Tour. Like, of course, like one of his most well known songs he wrote for the White Album.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, I'm like a torch in the website. I mean, that stands out. I think I love Only a Northern Song. I love that. I think it's on Yellow Submarine. I've always loved that song. I don't think it gets enough credit. I think it's a great song. But yeah, George is still very much coming into his own. Well, kids, as we're wrapping up part 6 here, we get Paul's admission that, and Paul does a very cheeky thing where he throws it back on the media. It's like, look, you're the guys that are going to go tell everybody I said this. You don't have to do that. You could have just not tell them. I'm like, Paul, do you know you're talking to a reporter right now? They report. I mean, what are we talking about?
Look, I'm going to be honest with you guys, but you don't have to report this. And even right now, you guys don't have to be talking about this. Paul, come on.
Yeah.
Paul, but this is again where it's just like Paul does things, and it's like nobody asked you to do that, though. You made the decision, you took it upon yourself to be the guy that admits that you do drugs, and everybody else then had to take on the consequences of that. And this is where, like I said, I can understand people that look at Paul away. Because of course, just think about it this way. Think about how often there are things that John has said in interviews that turned into controversy.
Sure.
And how he didn't mean for those things to turn into controversy. It might have been taken out of context or something else. And here is Paul very willingly offering up information. It's like, oh guys, if you're gonna take this and run with it, I'm not asking you to, but you can if you want. Listen, I'm just being honest with you guys. And it's just like, yeah.
I mean,
Paul has a way about him.
Paul has a way about him. But also, you maybe could have just said, Paul, do you take drugs? Well, I don't know if I want to answer that. Well, why? Well, because look, if I tell you yes, you're going to run with it. If I tell you no, you may not believe me. Why do I even bother answering you? But that's not a Paul answer. That's a John answer. Do you know what I mean? So maybe Paul didn't have it in him to freaking lie or to be standoffish about it. I don't think that's who Paul. Now, having said that, Phil, there are clips through these years, of when Paul doesn't like a question he's being asked.
Yes.
He puts the middle finger up. He scratches his head. He'll scratch his face. It's very subtle, but he does it a lot.
Yeah. If he didn't want to answer that question, he wouldn't have answered it.
That's 100% right. Yes.
And I've seen enough of this guy in press where if he did not want to answer that question, he would not have answered it.
Sure.
He wanted to answer that question. He wanted people to know.
I agree. Yeah. And we wrap this episode up, kids, with the live satellite link that basically they were told we don't even have a countdown, you just have to wing it, good luck. And they took off and it was great. They got it in one take. They did All You Need Is Love. Mick Jagger's sitting on the floor and he's definitely into this. And yeah, I love this song. What a great era this is, Phil. 67 is a monster year for this band in
Yeah.
terms of, discovering who they are and expanding their horizons and becoming more creative than they ever have been. Like, what a way to end part six, man. I'm all about this.
Yeah, for my opinion, one of the greatest songs. Uh, for a song that I think when you think like the quintessential Beatles song, that if you had to pick like maybe five songs to speak to who they are as a band, I think this is one of them.
I agree. I definitely, yeah, I definitely agree.
And when you think about like their story here about how this was supposedly written specifically for this satellite recording, and they can't really come up with was it really specific for this or not? Was it just one of John's songs that he had hanging around? It kind of feels like both, where John had a song just kind of sitting around, and they were like, "We need something specific to this. Let's just use that." Um, but I think it fits with so perfect with this time period
Mm.
and like where the world was, like how much like flower power was a thing, and how
Mm.
much protest was becoming a thing, and just like the messaging at that time was so important, and just that visual of them uh in this very hippie-esque environment, just everything around it, like towards the end of the recording, and how like the confetti or whatever that is raining down on them. um it also sounds very British every time I hear it, and that's why I'm saying it's it's such a Beatles song.
It is such a Beatles song. That's why. Look, I was fairly harsh on "Free as a Bird" and "Real Love," um, which I think it deserves it to a large degree, in my opinion. Both of them do, because Phil, you can't do it again. Like, you know what I mean? You just can't. You can't have your first kiss again, brother. It's never gonna happen. So like every time they tried to do something, they're like, it's a new Beatles song. You're like, yeah, it's not though, is it? Like, it's not really. Like, what'd you think about the last one they put out? Was it last year? I think another new Beatles song. I'm like,
I don't
yeah, I
know
don't,
that I heard it.
dude, I can't, man.
No.
I'm trying to remember the name of it now. I was so underwhelmed by it. The video is I saw fans going, "Oh, this video. Oh, it's so good." And I'm like, "Did we watch the same video?" Like,
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do the posthumous album thing, and it's not like this is one of those things where they're missing one member, like the stuff Linkin Park did within the last year, where they just brought in a new lead singer.
sure.
You're missing two members of this band,
Yeah.
um, and you're missing one part of the writing team. It's I don't know. It's just not the same.
Yeah, and kids, I'm torn on this myself. The Beatles never had to tour again together, and they never did. Lincoln Park, I don't know. I'm not a diehard Lincoln Park guy. I actually like that album. I think her vocals are really awesome, but that's me. I'm not.
Yeah, I
You know what I
really
mean?
I listened to it earlier today. Funny enough.
Yeah, I'm not like emotionally invested in that band. When I heard her sing, I'm like, why is everyone so pissed off? She sounds great to me. But
Yeah, people were not happy with some things about her personal life that came out.
sure, I know
Um,
the Danny Masterson stuff that happened too, and it was
yeah, that's why some people were not happy with her being picked. But also, it wouldn't have mattered. People have such a deep connection to Chester, and I get it. Um,
and plus she's a she, Phil. That's not helping anything
also, yeah,
because
but
people suck,
yeah, what a great way to end this episode with
right?
that satellite recording, because like you said, creatively, this time period is like arguably their peak as a band,
It
and
is. I think so too.
yeah, just to end on such a high note of that global satellite recording, And like I said, you could see some of the dangling plot threads of like George coming into this and like George kind of struggling to find his place in this band still. Um, Ringo is just still along for the ride, and you can see some of the stuff on the horizon with John. They don't talk about it a lot, but I attribute that to uh they are the producers of this. And so of course they're not going to talk about some of the more negative stuff with John.
Mm.
But you could kind of see it. And maybe it's because I already know it's coming.
Yeah, and
You can kind of see it.
it doesn't really, to my recollection. Now, keep in mind, Phil, this is not the same version that was released 30 years ago, 25 years ago, whatever it's been. But I don't recall it getting insanely dark. I don't
No,
think it really does. Like it could, but I don't
no,
think it
but
really does.
they're not gonna let it be
No,
dark because
no.
that's not really how they do things.
Yeah.
That's not how they present themselves. So I can't see them producing or being a part of the production of a documentary that then did this turn like behind the music and then that's when it went dark. No,
Yeah.
I can't see the Beatles doing that.
Nah, they're not. And again, kids, all I can say is rest in peace to John and George because it's heartbreaking. Like
Yeah.
the best you're gonna get, in my opinion. And I love the music. Don't get me wrong, but in my opinion, the first 6 episodes are where it's at, man. Like 7 and 8 are gonna bring us the end. Going to bring us the very tame and watered down versions of the rift that happened between
Yes.
all four of them.
Yes, of course. They're not gonna delve deep into it. But I do think that because they started this thing very young and then it got very big before they knew it, they were in the middle of something that it's like it's hard, you know? It's hard to keep a band together. It's hard to keep doing something when this is your claim to fame. And I'm not a believer that you should keep doing something just because everybody feels like you should.
Yeah.
And so tough decisions are made like that when, you get older and sometimes, what you thought you wanted changes. It's just how it is.
It is, and artists mature, and kids as fans, we have to let artists mature,
Yeah.
or we don't, and everybody can get all pissed off when Metallica gets their first haircut. So,
Or yeah, I've always looked at it like I would rather they stop doing things together than just, continue to do things because it felt like they had to.
mhm. Yeah, it's just tough because as fans, we want to see them continue, but it's not. I mean, and John made the clips of John. We'll end on this, kids. The clips of John that you can hear playing through these episodes are like, for all those fans that wanted to see us in person, I'm sorry about that. And I don't think this particular clip was played in this version of the anthology, but the actual clip also says, you've got the records, you've got the memories or whatever, and I'm sorry you can't see us play live. It's basically his way of saying, look, you'll be fine. We've got albums. Just go listen to the albums. Like to the end. I don't believe that John ever understood why people love them as much as they did. I don't think he ever understood why.
John is very fascinating, man. I hate every time I feel like I make it seem like, oh, what's coming on the horizon for him, like impending doom. But he had such a fascinating life, man. He had his struggles.
Mm,
He had his bright moment. I don't know it's that he didn't see how much people loved this band. It sometimes feels like he didn't get the carefree joy side that Paul had of being in this band. Because I always feel like there was other things going on with him. He was the only guy at the start of this band that was married, and he had other things going on.
mhm.
And of course, I don't want to make it seem like Cynthia, or the old ball of chain at home. But it's hard when you're part of a fan group, and I think most of us can connect with this idea of like going out with friends, and you're the one that's in a relationship, and everybody can just
Mm.
do what they want to do, but you can't. And that was already, he got married early, so that was always a part of it. And then of course, like, you know just his his struggles with abandonment and how that played into certain things, and just like how he dealt with drug use, and how all the other members it kind of was seen as like this experimental fun phase, and he really struggled at one point.
He did. Yeah, it was tough for him. And there's a book of basically his diary that was entrusted to someone in the family. The family completely commissioned this book, and it was done under their permission after John was killed. But it's a very interesting read, and it's written in the guy's words, but it's got a lot of John's own thoughts and words in there. And man, he didn't have a happy life, dude. Like it was a lot
Yeah.
of he was in his own head. There was so many people trying to scam John and Yoko, and some of it worked. Some people sold him a bill of goods, and they paid a lot of money for it. And uh,
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I just think that he, of course, had his ups and downs in life, and you could see he struggled with depression a bit. He struggled with like his drug use. He struggled with like his relationships, and um, yeah. Of course, they're not going to cover any of this in this documentary. That is a background thing going on with him.
Yeah,
Um, but the other three, that's not as big of a part of their stories, man. Like their personal baggage isn't as big of a part of their stories.
it's not. I mean, kids, if you know the story of the Beatles, May Pang is not going to be covered. The Lost
Yeah.
Weekend will not be covered in the anthology.
Lost Weekend, where he's talking about how he's the happiest he's ever been in his life.
Yep. Yep. By the way,
Uh,
May Pang was a gorgeous young girl at the time. I think she
yeah,
was their secretary or his assistant or something. And
yeah,
I'm always like, come on, John, go be happy, brother. It's okay. We won't hate you. Like,
yeah. Um, I mean, he talked about how happy he was being a parent the second time around when he was
yeah,
actually there to be a parent, and but I mean that's also understandable because um, he was very young when he had his first kid,
very true.
and then he was on the road a lot, and they were still a touring band, and he missed a lot of it. So yeah, that's what I mean of like of he had a lot going on with him early on, and I don't think he got to be as carefree as some of the other members.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. And, well, kids, that we're going to see where we find Mr. Lennon and the rest of the band coming up in parts 7 and 8. And as we said, the end is near. It's almost like knowing that Anakin's getting ready to turn heel and put on the suit. So the end's coming. But we hope you've enjoyed the ride so far, kids. And again, I greatly encourage you to go check out the original version of the anthology to get, what I believe to be a much more comprehensive cut of this monster documentary. Phil, before we get out of here, let's get your last word on parts 5 and 6.
These are two of my favorite episodes so far, just because this is my favorite period of the band. It's really, like I said, the period where I discovered them. So I really love some of the stuff like the making of Sergeant Pepper, and like um I definitely perked up in episode 5 with like Paperback Writer and some of that stuff. So I really enjoyed these two episodes.
Yeah, I love them. 7 and 8 are going to be awesome because it's them and because we get some amazing music. There's still a lot of amazing music left to go, kids, and some really good albums left. But yeah, the end is nigh, as they say. So everybody get ready for that. But yeah, I'm with Phil. I think these 2 episodes are great. And again, I love the Pepper period. But much more cool stuff to come, kids. And we appreciate you again hanging out with us. Be sure to go check out parts 1 through 4 if you haven't yet. And we hope you enjoy those as well. But thanks for checking us out, folks. And remember to please subscribe on Boeing Studios on YouTube and follow Phil on Grapsity and check out the other podcasts we have there on Boeing Studios. We appreciate it very much. And we'll be back real soon with the wrap up episode of the Beatles Anthology parts 7 and 8. But until then, that is the Beatles Anthology, parts 5 and 6. Hey, thanks for listening to the show. Check out our social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads at 6M Podcasts. We'll see you next time.